Welcome, everyone in the United States, Canada, and around the world to another episode of It's a Wrap with Rap, the podcast of overcomers and the podcast of useful and informative topics to better our daily life and mental spirit. I am your host, Ron Rappaport. Let me start off by thanking all of our great listeners, viewers, supporters, and sponsors for helping to make this podcast such a success. We are being heard on all major platforms and the podcast website, itsawrapwithrap.com, where you can find all the episodes, previews of future episodes, and great products and services offered from our sponsors. My guest today is Dr. Joan Ifland. Dr. Ifland is a processed food addiction specialist who has broken a lot of ground in the realm of food addiction, having released a number of influential books and studies, and she is currently working on evidence-based training for healthcare professionals. Dr. Ifland is a fellow of the American College of Nutrition and earned her PhD in addictive nutrition at Union Institute and University. She also earned an MBA at Stanford University and is a fellow of the American College of Addiction. She created Addiction Reset, an online resource and community for people struggling with food addiction, and created a number of other free online resources. In this episode, Dr. Ifland brings to light the shady reality of what goes on behind the scenes in the marketing departments of big food companies in the United States. She will discuss what goes on in a person's brain that causes them to become addicted to processed food and how marketing professionals at big food companies are taking advantage of it. Why does it seem that willpower doesn't ever win the battle against addiction and craving? Dr. Ifland will address how one begins to effectively reverse processed food addiction and start to move in a healthy direction. Food addiction is not an eating problem, but rather a substance use problem caused by addictive substances and foods produced by food companies, causing people to become addicted to it. Welcome, Dr. Ifland, to the podcast. So happy to have you here with us.
Well, thank you. I'm very, very happy to be here. Thanks for
Well, we're
having
glad to
me.
have you. This is a great topic to discuss.
hmm
I'm sure it affects everybody out there, and everybody's going to be very
hmm
interested in it. Let's start off by introducing yourself to our audience and tell us how you became interested in the subject of processed food addiction and how processed food affected you from childhood onward.
Well, it really started with my grandfather. He owned a candy store. Kind of dead giveaway that there might be a little sugar addiction coming down the highway.
Yeah,
My mother always had a glass of caffeine and sugar in her hand, and she was she was unpredictable. You just never knew when there was going to be a violent outburst. She was a very intelligent woman. My father, very similar. We grew up in the 1950s, but there were plenty of processed foods around the house. And we were all skinny as rails. There wasn't a lot of food around the house, but we were very unstable emotionally. There were fights erupting, and just a lot of anger in that household, which I now know is very closely associated with processed foods, because processed foods make your blood sugar unstable.
right.
You're eating sugar and flour, and boom, it gets into your blood system all at once. You got a blood glucose high, boom, you get an insulin release, and now your blood sugar is crashing. But in the crash, you get an adrenaline release to keep you from dying from not enough glucose. So there we were in this household, even little kids, with our blood glucose going up and down because there was the white bread and the, all kinds of desserts in the household all the time. And our blood sugar was just up and down. Nobody, of course, knew. And we were fighting all the time. We had all this adrenaline in our systems. Well, fast forward 40 years, 44 years. I'm now 44 years old, and I have two little girls of my own. And I'm absolutely determined not to have these explosive episodes of anger and rage. I'm doing therapy, and I'm going to 12-step groups, and I'm going to women's healing groups, and I'm doing everything I can think of, but every now and then it just erupts. and it's shameful, and I hate myself for it, and nothing is working. But in one of my 12-step groups, somebody suggested that it was being caused by sugar. Well, I just didn't believe it. But at the end of the year, my yo-yo dieting had kicked in and I'd regained the weight, so I went and got the book. And on January 1st, 1996, I eliminated sugar and flour from my diet. And the miracles just started rolling in that very first week, like 4 days later, the craving stopped, which I'd had. I can remember craving terribly when I went to kindergarten. I couldn't go to the kitchen and get something.
Right.
I'd been craving my whole life. And the brain fog stopped, and the fatigue stopped, and the bloating stopped. And then the next week, a lifelong sinus infection cleared up. And my allergies, so this the constant sneezing, went way down. But in the third week, I really became committed to this mission when I realized that I had not been yelling for 3 weeks.
Wow.
And I did join the support group. That was my second of four-step groups. And I asked them, I said, do people become less irritable on this food plan? They all said, yeah. And I just made the commitment. I said, everybody on the planet deserves to know what these common substances that are in our food are doing to us. Yeah, that's how I got into this.
You know, you said you were skinny as a child, and you said everyone in the family was skinny, but yet it sounds like you were eating a lot of sugar. What do you attribute the thinness to? Were you guys just running around a lot, burning it off, or
Well, there was
why was
not a
that?
lot of food. So this is the 1950s,
Okay.
and they didn't have giant sizes.
Oh yeah.
If mother got a bag of potato chips as a big treat for us, it was this big, and you got three or something.
Right.
And we were not allowed to, if we wanted to eat something out of the kitchen, we had to go and ask. So there wasn't very much food, but there was Velveeta cheese, and there was grape jelly, and there was orange juice and toast, and just all of the things that we know can destabilize a person's emotions. But the big thing that was not in that household, because it wasn't anywhere until the 1980s, was high fructose corn syrup. And we
Okay.
know that high fructose corn syrup converts to fat 2.5 times more readily than sugar.
Okay. And I hear what you're saying, and I know there's people out there listening to you right now, and they're probably saying to themselves, well, wait a minute, don't you have to have some sugar in your diet?
Mm. Yeah, it's just, you know what that reminds me of? It's a quote from a cigarette executive, a tobacco executive. And he says, I would rather have a shorter life with the pleasure of a cigarette than a longer life without. And so that's kind of the echo of that statement. But don't you have to have sugar? This is debatable. Like Eskimos, sorry, the Inuits they don't even have carbohydrates. They don't have plants. All they have are marine animals, sea animals, and they've been fine for eons, for
Yeah,
thousands of years.
yeah,
So you don't have to have carbohydrates. And then you look at like jungle populations. It's very, very difficult to catch an animal in a jungle. So they've just been doing fine for eons on plant-based.
gotcha.
Humans are very, very, very adaptable until you put, so what happened right after high fructose corn syrup came on the market, the tobacco industry, boom, suddenly bought Kraft and Nabisco and General Foods. Tobacco came right in and bought those three companies in 3 years, between 1985 and 1988. Well, what the heck happened?
Yeah,
Why? Just think of the basic business model of tobacco. You take a worthless, destructive product, but it has craving properties. So you don't sell the product based on any kind of value. You sell it on the basis of deception, like cigarettes are sexy or rebellious or masculine. And you just creep it into the person's life until they've used it often enough to develop cravings for it. And then you got them hooked. So that's the business model that they brought over to processed foods. And they hired a guy, Howard Moskowitz, Harvard PhD, experimental psychology and marketing. And what he did was he maxed out the amount of addictive substances he could hide in a jar of pasta sauce or a can of vegetables before the consumer would detect it. So just like tobacco hid nicotine and pyrazine in cigarettes, Howard Moskowitz, he has a very complicated uh, data intense method of iterating a product until he had the maximum amount of addictive substance hidden in it. So in 1970, you could eat a slice of bread and go on about your day. But by the 1990s, that slice of bread had so much sugar, fat, salt hidden in it that you would eat it and then you would eat the rest of the loaf. Your cravings would dominate your behavior.
That kind of leads into my second question. The standard American diet today is filled with highly processed, low nutrient, cheap foods. You call them addictive food-like substances. So can you just kind of expound and give the audience just a few more details on the food industry and exactly what happened in the 1980s?
Yep, yep. So the substances that they hid turns out activate the same parts of the brain as drugs of, recreational drugs. So sugar and caffeine and so sugar and caffeine activate the dopamine pathway.
Right.
Same thing, same pathway as alcohol. And dairy has a casomorphine in it designed to put a baby calf to sleep. Gluten has a gluteomorphine in it designed to attract humans to eating it because you're getting a slight high from it. And salt also activates the morphine pathway. And then you have excessive fats. So this is not if you just eat normal fats, but if like somebody persuades you to get on a carnivore food plan or a keto food plan and says, "Oh, you can eat all the fat you want. It's so satiating, you just won't want to eat too much of it." Well, that's completely not true because fat activates the same brain centers as marijuana. That's called the cannabinoid pathways after cannabis. So, and then you have food additives. So you had this food industry adding things to their products, just like tobacco added pyrazine to cigarettes. So that's what happened. And now we have these three major craving pathways, all of them hyperactive. Americans are eating most of their food in processed foods. They're eating most of their food, 73% of their foods, in those substances that I just mentioned.
So what is the impact? Can you talk a little bit about the impact on our brains and body when processed foods are consumed? I know there's something to do with the frontal lobe and the other parts of the brain.
Yeah, it's the craving part of it is pretty simple. You have the dopamine, opioid, cannabinoid, you have these pleasure pathways, and the food industry has conditioned, if you will, trained those pathways to release floods of craving neurotransmitters. So that's one thing. You have these very sensitive, very reactive parts of the brain, these centers, pumping out cravings. Well, those centers need blood flow in order to do that. when a group of brain cells are being stimulated, the blood flow goes right over there. Okay. But that means that the frontal lobe, where you do a lot of thinking, where you do learning, where you do memory, where you do attention, where you make decisions and solve problems and control impulses, that part of the brain is not getting enough blood flow to function.
Ah,
And then there's a third piece, which is when you get that kind of euphoria, the brain wants you to come back down to earth. This is evolution or creation, but the brain wants you to come back down to earth in case something dangerous happens. It doesn't want you to be in that euphoric state.
right.
So it activates a stress pathway in the brain. And now you have, so that's a typical classical profile of a craving brain. You have hyperactive reward, pleasure centers, craving centers. You have hyperactive stress, and you have underactive, not happening in the thinking part of the brain.
So you're just not thinking right. You're going right for the craving part.
So how are we experiencing this? We have attention deficit epidemics. We have learning difficulties epidemics. Children are not able to focus. We have poor impulse control. We have poor decision making. We have a hard time processing emotions. And we have an epidemic of memory loss, dementia, and Alzheimer's. So that's how people are experiencing this. I can't remember. Oh, it's because that memory center is not getting blood flow.
Joan, let me just ask you this. Is is this processed food problem restricted only to North America, or is this being seen internationally?
No, it is the obesity epidemic is global. So what happened is when the U.S. really started to crack down on tobacco, the tobacco industry went to the Secretary of State and said, "Could you please help us get into markets elsewhere in the world?" And the Secretary of State cooperated. So tobacco addiction spread around the world. What did that mean? That meant that the tobacco industry had relationships all over the world with the corner store, and they had advertising budgets. So when they decided to spread processed foods around the world, they just sat there and called up all the corner stores in the world and said, "Great, we're going to start sending you sugary breakfast cereal and white bread," or whatever they sent them. They sent them processed foods.
Yeah,
And then they called up all their advertising contacts. Now, advertising is a volume discount, and it's a volume discount price structure. So when they took their existing tobacco advertising contracts and they put the processed food advertising on top of it, it was very cheap. So they could do a lot of it. And those are two elements of the addiction business model. You have to have a lot of deceptive advertising, and you have to make it very available. You have to hide addictive substances in the product, and you have to make it very cheap. So that's why the introduction of high fructose corn syrup is so critical to the story. Before high fructose corn syrup, you only had sugar, and that was controlled by another drug cartel in Florida and was very expensive. But everybody grows corn. There's no, I mean, just the high fructose syrup is cheap. And then they had a cheap sweetener. And I think that that's what triggered their entry, because that's a rush. You have Kraft, Nabisco, and General Foods, these giant companies that are gobbled up by tobacco. Why? Why would they suddenly do that?
yeah.
Well, they have a cheap addictive substance they could hide in the products.
What do you say to your critics that contend food substance addiction is not real because they're out there? Oh, I think we might have lost you. Okay, Joan might be having technical difficulties.
I'm back. I'm back.
Okay, you're back?
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Okay. What do you say to your critics that contend food substance addiction is not real? And I know they're out there.
Oh gosh, yeah. Um, well, if it's somebody like you, I say, well, dietitians are the professional arm of the processed food industry. 40% of dietitians work for the processed food industry. They're trained. They get their funding from the processed food industry. And
Let me take a moment out of the podcast to tell you about our guest and supporter of the podcast, Dr. Laura Gabanyan's new book, Common Wisdom: 8 Scientific Elements of a Meaningful Life. I have read this book and must admit that to have the knowledge that this book exists and not read it would be a loss. Dr. Laura, who is a world-renowned physician and researcher, interviewed 60 wise adults across North America and defined wisdom as 8 elements. These 8 elements are the secret ingredients to living a life of joy and success. This is one of those books that you think, has this ever been written before? The book is very reader friendly, bite sized, to the point, easily digestible, yet profound and relatable. Along the way, the book reserves a place for the reader to write their reaction to each concept so they can revisit it later. While rooted in scientific research, this book is beautifully written in a way that makes the profound insights accessible and relatable to everyone. It's not just a study, it's a secret formula for achieving happiness and success. Hopefully, parents would encourage their children to read this book to enrich their lives going forward. I encourage you to give yourself and your friends and family the gift of learning and move towards the light of wisdom. You will not be disappointed purchasing this book. This book can transform your life. The book is available from Amazon in hardcover, paperback, audiobook, and Kindle formats. Information about the book will be listed in the podcast notes.
but there's another answer, which is like the textbook. If you don't mind, I'll hold it up.
Sure, go ahead.
This is 240,000 words. It took me 3 years to write and edit. It's
Okay.
built on 2,000 citations.
I'll
So you
hold it
just
up
look
again
through the evidence.
because some people are not going to be watching this on YouTube. It's called
Ah,
Processed Food Addiction: Foundations Assessment and Recovery, and Dr. Ifland wrote the book. So
it's a
anybody
text.
interested, that's the name of the book if you want to get it. Is that on Amazon by
It's on
chance?
Amazon. It's a textbook. It's
Okay.
published by CRC Press.
Okay.
So the other answer to that question is, the evidence is conclusive. And of course, you're going to say, what evidence? I mean, nobody's studying food addiction, but everybody's studying obesity and diabetes and eating disorders. And when you look at that, Rich, they're describing addiction.
Right. Now, in your opinion, how many people who eat the standard American diet have a food addiction? And how can our audience identify if they have one?
Okay, such a good question. I think it's more than 80, maybe 83 or 84%.
Wow, that's a lot.
But we do have some research, it's animal research, showing that it only takes a human about 6 months to become addicted to processed foods. And this has been going on now, in next year, it'll be 40 years since the tobacco industry moved into processed foods. So we've been bombarded with this deceptive advertising. Oh, processed foods are convenient. Oh, everybody just wants to take a pill. Oh, nobody wants to cook. Nobody has time. And oh, they're so cheap. All of that deception, very, very deceptive
Right.
messaging. So that's been going on for 40 years. And so that's one bit of evidence that at this point, most people would be having these intense cravings that wash out their willpower or wash out their resistance, overwhelming temptation. Everybody's having those experiences. But how do you know? Well, you go to the diagnostic manual for addictions. You look at like alcohol, which is it's a addictive substance that has calories. And you say, I wonder if people who overeat are exhibiting those 11 signs. And indeed, you can find evidence, you can find support for the idea that most people in the United States will meet 6 or more of those criteria. And that's the threshold for a severe addiction. So it's not just an addiction, it's a severe addiction.
So
And
they
I can
have
run
that.
through those 11 signs if you like.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So number one is when you eat something but you didn't plan to eat it. So it's called unintended use. You think you're going to eat a couple out of the box and you eat the box. You're going to go home without stopping for fast food, and then you stop for fast food. You wake up, I'm going to have a really good day of clean food today. And then by 10 o'clock, you're in front of the vending machine. That's unintended use. Number two is failure to cut back. And that's just everywhere. People lose the weight and they regain it. They say, today I'm going to go on a diet. And by the end of the day, they've overeaten again. So that's failure to cut back. You have a plan to cut back and you don't. Or you cut back for a while and then it comes back. Everybody's got that. 99% of people who lose weight will start regaining it within 3 years. Number three is time. It takes a lot of time. And it's not just time going and getting the stuff, sleeping it off. It's also the time in your head where you're planning and you're craving. So that's number three. Number four is cravings. So we know that cravings correlate with your weight. The heavier you are, the more cravings you have.
Ah.
So we know 84% of Americans are overweight, obese, or severely obese. So we know cravings go right along with that. Number five is failure to fulfill roles. So you can't get down on the floor anymore with your kids because you're so big, but you're still eating. You're too tired to go for promotion, but you're still eating. That's number five. And then six is relationship problems. You want to connect with somebody, you love somebody, but you're craving and you can't think about them because you're thinking about what you want to eat. Or you have this cognitive deficit where you can't even pay attention to them. You can't understand what they're saying, and you're still eating. So you're sitting up at night, maybe you're watching television, they go to bed, but you don't go to bed with them. You've lost the intimacy. Maybe you're staying up late to watch TV, they go to bed, you don't go to bed because you know you've got something stashed in the laundry room and you want to go eat it. So you have this loss of intimacy. And then the next one is activities given up. So you used to go bowling after work, or you used to go to a civic meeting, or you used to go to the PTA, or you used to run, or you used to do something after work. But now you're so tired and you're so craving, you don't really want to see people because your body shape has changed. And all you want to do is go home and eat. So you have loss of activities. Number nine, let's see, number eight is hazardous use. I mean, you think you're driving out of the fast food place and you're kind of driving with your elbow, or you're so big you can't see your feet anymore and you're tripping, or your weight is so distributed unevenly that you have a tendency to fall down, but you're still eating. And then number nine is use in spite of knowledge of consequences. Well, 93% of Americans over the age of 20 have a diet-related diagnosis.
Okay, we might be having a technical problem again. Let's see. Dr. Ifland's out in Seattle, and she might be having a technical problem. She might be calling back in, so let's all hang on for a second. You there?
Yeah, let me just do the last one again.
Okay,
So
number
you have
9.
progression or tolerance, and we can see that across the whole population, where in the 1980s, people were already eating 50% perhaps of their food in processed foods, but now it's 73%. So all across the whole population. And then you have the last one is eating when you're not hungry. So when you're not hungry, you're avoiding, but you're still eating. You're eating because you're angry, or because you're tired, or because you're sad, or because you're depressed or anxious, or you're worried. That's withdrawal avoidance. You could be having those things because you're starting into withdrawal, and so you turn it off. So those are the 11 signs.
Well, I think our audience can take all those signs and see how they pertain to their individual uh, cravings.
Yeah.
What steps should a person take if they recognize they have a food addiction? What steps should they take?
Yeah, and I'm going to make kind of a broader plea here, if you will.
Okay.
I'm working on a presentation right now about the diseases associated with processed foods. You know, their processed foods weaken cell function. And so that means that essential systems in the body are also weakened. And when you combine those weak systems, you get like 20 common chronic diseases. You get high blood pressure and diabetes and heart disease and obesity and depression and anxiety and attention deficit and memory loss. You get fatigue, you get the eating disorders, you get infertility, because one of the things that processed foods do to people is inflammation. So they inflame every cell in the body. So all your glands and organs, your liver is inflamed, and we have chronic liver disease. Your kidneys are inflamed. We have chronic kidney disease. Your gut is inflamed. We have inflammatory bowel and Crohn's. Your pancreas is inflamed. Your brain is inflamed. So whether or not you think, based on the signs that we just talked about, that you're like, oh, do I have it? Do I have, do I not do that? And really, do I? This is worse than cigarettes. So
Yeah.
people get cigarettes, they didn't like try to wrestle with, well, am I addicted or am I not? No, they were told by the Surgeon General it causes cancer. Cancer is also related to processed foods. And they went to work. Most people, I think, that's one of the reasons why tobacco saw such an opportunity in processed foods, is people were getting off of cigarettes, and it was already known that when people get off cigarettes, they gain weight. They just moved to the next market. So I would say, put aside the debate about whether you're addicted or not, and just focus on the the destructive nature of these processed foods. And particularly if you're in that 93% that have a diet related diagnosis, it's not just the processed food industry that is profiting from processed foods. This is an amazing statistic. I've been working on a presentation this week on this, so this is brand new.
Okay.
The medical industry
Yeah.
revenue from processed food related chronic illnesses is $4 trillion a year.
Wow.
So it's like it's hundreds of billions for heart disease. It's maybe it's not, it's over 100 billion for diabetes, for depression, for anxiety. It's just you go down that list of
It's a
20 diseases.
it's a whole industry.
It's an industry now. If you really line it out, if you really connect all the dots, this is a $4 trillion industry that depends on people consuming processed foods and being sick from them.
Wow.
So, processed foods in 2020, there were 1.7 million Americans died from diet related diseases. 1.7 million Americans. Well, that was the year when 300,000 Americans died of COVID.
Yeah,
But who, what were the headlines? What were the screaming
right.
headlines?
Nobody mentioned processed food, that's for sure.
No, no.
Uh,
So what do you do? Well, first of all, keep it out of your house.
yeah,
I know you have cravings for it. And when you get those overwhelming cravings, in spite of the fact I'm not going to eat it, I don't want to eat it, I see how it's, if you get a flood of cravings in your brain, they will shut down your rational thinking brain and just forgive yourself. This is a business model. It's a vicious, wicked business model, especially since they targeted children when they came in. Like they took the Marlboro Country Store and they translated it into the Kool-Aid Wacky Warehouse. It's a cravings development marketing technique, and they were, going after 2-year-olds.
yeah.
So, yeah,
Oh,
so
join.
keep it out of your house. Get a crock pot. It takes less time to fill up a crock pot in the morning before you go to work than it does to wait in a line for fast food. So just get a crock pot and learn like maybe just 5 recipes and have this beautiful meal waiting for you at home. Put the leftovers into a thermos and take it to work the next day. Make your own food if you can. And even I'm going to give you this little insider thing. There's one fast food meal that's actually a real meal,
Okay.
and it's fajitas. Don't
Uh-huh.
get the tortillas, obviously, if you can resist, but it is, it's either shrimp or chicken or beef.
Right.
All of those are great proteins. It's got beans with it. That's a super nutritious starch. It's got grilled vegetables on the plate, and it's got raw vegetables on top. That's a great meal.
Yeah. Matter of fact, I don't eat fajitas that much, but I eat a lot of grilled like chicken and vegetables and put them on
Exactly.
skewers. I put them on skewers and barbecue them, and it's great. And
Yeah.
so we're talking, so people listening to this are probably saying, okay, well, what do I need to cut out? Okay, so you're talking about potato chips, cupcakes, candy, all that bad stuff.
Pasta,
Pasta.
bread, yeah, sodas.
What
If you
about
can
whole
only
wheat
give up
bread?
one
What,
thing, just work on sodas. So bread is one of those really, really deceptive products. And if you lived in Europe where the gluten levels are much, much lower than in the US, it wouldn't hurt you so much. You buy a baguette, it has flour, it has water, it has yeast in it. But here in the United States, that is a perfect product for the processed food industry to hide lots and lots of sugar, fat, salt, and that's and now you associate it. So you think, oh, I'm going to have a slice of bread I made myself. I know exactly what's in it, but your brain associates it with these craving products, and by association, it gets all excited, and now you've got the cravings going on again.
it can be very difficult to get a face-to-face therapy appointment these days for those who need it. It can be expensive, difficult to squeeze a visit in your hectic schedule, not to mention how lonely and unsupported you can feel in between sessions, and how you just seem to forget all the things your therapist told you since your last visit. No more. Therapy on your terms is now available through onlinetherapy.com. Your personal therapist will be by your side from start to finish, guiding you to a happier you through the sections, worksheets, unlimited messaging, and live sessions available as video, voice only, or text chat. You can do this from wherever you are in the world. Each section includes all the information and hands-on tools that you need to identify, challenge, and overcome your problems. In each worksheet, you will answer questions and get valuable hands-on tools and tips from your therapist on a daily basis. Each week, you will have access to a 45-minute live therapy session with your therapist via video, voice only, or text, providing a perfect opportunity to receive instant guidance and support. You can always send your therapist a message with any questions or thoughts. To start, choose your area of concern, including but not limited to anxiety, depression, OCD, PTSD, stress, anger management, couples therapy, family issues, panic attack, ADHD, chronic pain, eating disorders, abuse, and trauma, and get matched with your therapist. Choose the subscription plan that best suits your needs, starting at just $40 a week. OnlineTherapy.com has received an average rating of 4.8 out of 5 stars. Please click the link in the podcast notes or below this video ad for detailed information and to order and start your therapy journey today to become a happier you. Joan, what can we do to minimize the negative exposures of a child early in life so they don't have to fight this battle? What can the parents do?
Keep it out of the house. Keep it out of the house. It's it's dismaying. It's sad that the schools push this on children.
Yeah.
The processed food industry with, many lobbyists in Washington, they provide the school lunches and the school breakfast, and they're almost all refined carbohydrates. So send your kids to school with their own lunch. They don't need any money at school, and keep it out of your house. Educate, educate, educate. So, Ron, if you want to offer a free gift, I have this video that shows how processed foods create these 20 diseases, and I'm happy to send it to your
Yeah, please
listeners.
do. Please do. And we'll put it on our website and we'll put it on our Facebook group. Is intermittent fasting good for this condition?
No, so having an eating window is great. If you say I'm only going to eat between 8 in the morning and 6:30 at night, that's great. They do call that level 1 fasting, breakfast, lunch, dinner. And we used to call it just not eating between meals, but times change.
Okay.
But anything more than that, we have very good evidence that it wakes up yet another powerful part of the brain. It's way back here in the primitive brain, and it's the fear of famine, food seeking brain. So if you diet or you fast, we've got good research on it, it hyperactivates the dopamine pathways, and people get set up for binging. So
Okay.
then their brain is like so terrified that you're going to die of famine. Primitive brain doesn't understand dieting and fasting. It just understands, do we have enough to eat or do we not? And if we don't have enough to eat, then I really need to rev up my humans food seeking. And now you're beyond cravings and you're into obsession and compulsion and binging. As when if you're like if you're foraging food in a famine and you finally find some, you eat it as fast as you can. Well, we've got that labeled as binging.
Yeah. How can one avoid relapses and what are the biggest triggers?
So the food, and this is part of their business model, very, very available. They're taking out the cigarette vending machines, they're replacing them right away with snack and soda machines.
Yeah.
So if something's available to you, it trickles out that dopamine. Just sheer availability, proximity, it's nearby, will create cravings. So First of all, if you lapse, just know it's not your fault. You don't want to eat this stuff and you don't want to be sick. And if you lapse, what you say to yourself is, wow, the processed food industry is doing an incredibly good job of pumping my head full of cravings so much so that it overwhelms my willpower. That's their fault. Now, I don't want to use the word victim if it means, oh, I'm victim, I'm going to sit back and do nothing.
Yeah, right.
But if you do use the word victim and you say, oh, well, dang, I'm not giving them one more penny of my money. I'm not going to cooperate with being a victim. I'm going to understand how to avoid, kind of the craving triggers. So what are the craving triggers? Big one is going hungry. Hungry creates cravings, and then the addition of this food seeking. Emotions. So we do in our recovery communities, we do a lot of training in emotional management. Relationships are a big cravings trigger. So we do a lot of training in how to communicate in relationships without getting stressed out. Fatigue, disrupted sleep. So it's very interesting. The same circuit in the brain controls sleep and eating. If you have a bad night's sleep, you're not eating so well. If you have a bad eating day, then you're not sleeping so well. The sleep is a big, big factor. We need rest. What do you do to keep your brain calm so that when you encounter one of these triggers, it doesn't blow up your cravings? You learn to calm your brain, meditation, visualizations, rest, getting enough rest. Screens can cause cravings if there's something stressful going on the screen that can activate the stress pathway in the brain, which can then reach over and activate the cravings pathway. So this is just another way to forgive yourself and really understand that this truly is not your fault. When you think that you are under a blanket of advertising and availability, cheap prices, and everybody around you,
Yeah.
I know this sounds like the hardest thing to do, but if you really want to make this easy on yourself, ask the people whom you see the most often. You can show them this video that I'll be happy to send you.
Yeah.
Ask them to join you so that you're not watching somebody eat processed foods. You have this brain that wants you to fit in and be normal and be accepted. And if it sees somebody eating processed foods, it wants you to eat processed foods too. It's just another survival mechanism. So that I think that really the single best way to make this easy on yourself is to just talk to the people around you. And if there are people in your household, make real food the most available and fill your crock pot so the smell of that real food's in the air. Keep educating about the relationship of processed foods to all these mental, emotional, and physical painful conditions.
Okay. I just want to get just to the side, a side subject. Dark chocolate and fruit. Uh, they do have sugar in them. What's your thought on those?
Oh, so very different. So chocolate has granulated sugar in it, and that will get into your system very quickly. And it has caffeine in it, and it's very likely to have salt
Yeah.
hidden in it, versus a piece of fruit, which has fiber and vitamins and minerals and is nutritious. Some people are so sensitive they can't have the high sugar fruits anymore. But yeah, fruits, and some people can't have fruits. Even a piece of fruit will trigger that flood of cravings. So it's quite individualistic. I do a really quick, this is like a 5-minute food spreadsheet of real foods so that people will eat the greatest variety of foods that they like and they know how to make.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we hearing enough from dietitians on the subject of substance use disorder? And if not, why not? And I think you kind of alluded to that.
Yeah, they're stuck. We have dietitians in our training program, and they're really, really excited to get the skills. It's skill. There's a skill in talking to somebody expertly, but also compassionately. And they're really glad to have those skills. But oh my gosh, it's very sad to think of a dietitian. It's a tough training, and they get all through the training, and what are they going to do? Oh, I didn't know I was being trained to be the sales arm of the processed food industry.
Yeah.
It's very distressing to find out that you were presented with, oh, you'll be a dietitian, you'll fix people, you'll be helpful to people, you'll heal people, they'll love you. And then you come to find out it's like that's not true. You can't put diabetes into remission while you're eating processed foods.
Yeah. Now you offer programs on your website, one of which is Addiction Reset Community. Please tell us about that program and some other online resources that would help our audience.
Oh, thank you. So I've been in this field for 28 years. I started my doctoral program 20 years ago. For 22 years, I looked for a reliable way to get this really deep-seated cravings disorder to stop. And I tried over the 22 years between the time I got off of sugars and flours myself in 1996 and the time we started this online community, I tried 14 different major programs to try to get people reliably off of processed foods. But in writing the textbook, I learned that it's typically severe and people are typically traumatized by having it. They've gone for help and their doctor said, oh, you're imagining it. That doesn't exist. And yet it's killing them. Or they've lost loved ones and now they know what they should have done for that loved one. They could have saved their life. So it's traumatizing. Well, if you have this bad and it started in childhood and it's a lot of different substances and it's constantly being pushed on you and you're constantly being triggered, you need a safe environment. You need a safe space. And we give you the resources to create that safe space. We broadcast like you and I are on Zoom right now.
Right.
We do that 15 hours out of 24 with a live trained host. And that's what makes all the difference. We have videos, we have a daily podcast we record. So what people tell us is, I have somebody there all the time. I know you're there. I know you're there. And I know if you're not on live, I can get the podcast or I can get a video. So I am safe from cravings. I'm safe from cravings overwhelming my rational brain, because when you get in a community, you open that screen and you see people who cherish you, you get an oxytocin release in your body. It travels to your brain and it stops cravings. So the fact that you can get on this from your phone, or you can get on it from your laptop or your tablet, you can have it in your pocket. That just means anytime you're going to go, yeah, I have to have that. I have to have that. You just open your screen and that urge goes away. So we have advocates assigned to you. We have Facebook Messenger groups. We have a daily newsletter. We have a Facebook group so that you can connect with us in the way that works for you.
Okay. And leading into that, my next question is, how can people contact you?
The best thing to do is go to Food Addiction Reset and take the self quiz. So those are the 11 signs of addiction. But even if you've heard me and you say, well, I don't care whether I have an addiction, I just can't stop eating these, then there are places to submit your email address.
Okay.
You can email info@processedfoodaddiction.com. You can go to Processed Food Addiction. There's a place there where you can sign up for free information and just get into our system, get your email into our system So we can invite you to free workshops and we can help you with this process of getting educated and building skills.
Okay, what is that main website again for our audience?
Processedfoodaddiction.com.
Processed food addiction.com. All right.
And we are starting a workplace wellness consulting so that you can create a protective environment in your workplace. And I don't have that all hooked up, but I'll go ahead and announce it. It's realworkplacewellness.com.
Real.
Realworkplacewellness.com. If you're a professional and you want to train in this, just connect with us in any of those ways, and we'll get you invited to a free workshop on the training.
Okay, and food addiction reset, is that .com as well?
Yes, that's the community website.
Okay, for everybody listening out there, this is going to be in the podcast notes. So don't worry, it'll be in there. Now, in closing, Joan, what is the biggest piece of advice you can give our audience for overcoming addiction to processed food?
Don't blame yourself. This is not your fault. Just keep telling yourself, this is not my fault. This is not
Okay,
my fault. And build your skills. It
okay,
takes skills. Yeah.
awesome. Now, all right. Thank you so much, Dr. Ifland, for being on the podcast and enlightening us on this most important subject. I found it fascinating. I know our audience
Yeah.
will.
Thank you.
And if this is just something you don't hear about much at all.
No, increasingly you do. Like the Washington Post has published on this and the New York Times. It's creeping
It's
along.
creeping out there. Well, we'll do our best to get it out there.
Thank
Uh,
you.
Thanks again. And hopefully we can have you come back when you have more
I'd love to.
programs and things like that.
Yeah.
Comments and suggestions for the podcast, you can email me at itsarapwithrap@gmail.com. We have a Facebook group, It's a Rap with Rap. We have about 2,000 members in there. Our website is itsarapwithrap.com. Our Instagram is uh, It's a Rap podcast. And on X, formerly Twitter, we're at Rapper, WRAPPER 130. YouTube, all the episodes are on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. It's a Rap with Rap, the podcast uncut. I want to thank everyone for listening or viewing, and I want you all to please stay safe. And for now, it's a wrap.
Thank